everyone, and welcome to Two Goals. I'm Maria Laura.
And I'm Katya.
And for today's episode, we are excited to talk with one of our own. When we decided to start this podcast, there were already many professionals out there dedicating their time to share stories around football. To acknowledge that passion comes to different shapes and colors, and we need to help this industry to be accessible and enjoyable for all. Loving football and strongly believing that women and girls have as much right as men to enjoy the game, whether as a player, as spectators, as coaches, or as administrators, is one of the mottos of Pasifika Sisters, a platform co-founded by Jacqueline Tran, our honored guest from today. Currently performing as social responsibility media communications consultant and Oceania Football Confederation, Jacqueline has several years of experience uncovering football through overseeing weekly television productions, managing social media, generating and editing articles, conducting interviews, and researching potential story ideas. She will be explaining and discussing everything there is to know to understand women's football and football fandom and engagement in Oceania. Jacqueline, welcome to Two Goals.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
No, we are really, really excited. And for starters, we always want to ask an anecdote related to childhood and youngsters development. And in 2023, you will challenge the perspective of women's football in Oceania forever. If someone had told you when you were little that in 2023, New Zealand might be one of the hostesses of the biggest women's football tournament, what kind of reaction would you have had?
That's a really good question. And to be honest, as a kid, I would not have believed you even one iota, because for a lot of my childhood, I didn't know that there were other girls who played football. I started playing when I was 5 years old, and I only played with boys. I grew up in a small town, and there was no other girls who played football. I knew sort of when I was about 10, 11 years old that there were other girls who played, but they also only played with boys. And it wasn't until I went to high school that I discovered there are actually teams full of girls. So honestly, as a child, I would have said, wow, I can't believe that there's such a thing as a Women's World Cup. And of course, now we have women playing everywhere. The opportunities astounding compared to, even what is this, like 20 years ago. So today I'm really, really stoked that we have this opportunity to host this and to show little girls in New Zealand and across the Pacific and in Australia that, girls play this game and they play it really well.
Exactly. And it's the way to do it, right? That you mentioned something very, very important. It's in many parts of the world, maybe now this is not true, but some years ago, we could not say that there were a World Cup out there. And now we can say it, and we are thankful to the visibility given by the governing bodies that are making everything, and they are making sure that we can see it to believe it, as I always say here. And for the little girls that you said, that for the little girls start playing, for them to not have the same struggle that you had and I had and Maria had to before to start playing. This is the whole story. Always we have to say we need to break this barrier. But now let's jump in your professional career, your professional chapter. You have a bachelor degree in communications, and after completing it, you worked as a chief reporter and as a language assistant. Can you tell us what are the main inputs you gain through these experiences, which you reckon they are an asset for you today?
Yeah, so I think having been a print journalist, I think it gave me an insight into, how the news works for a start. And I mean, everything I learned has helped me in my media career for sure. And I think, being a language assistant, part of that was because of my background. So I grew up in New Zealand, and I grew up with a New Zealand mother and a father from New Caledonia. which is another island in the Pacific, one of the French colonies. So English was my first language, but I felt, every time I would see my cousins or my family from my dad's side, there was kind of a disconnect because of the language barrier. So it was really important to me to learn those language skills. And that's part of the reason why I became a teaching assistant, because I really wanted to be able to communicate with my family. Unfortunately, I wanted also to speak to my grandparents, but my grandparents on my dad's side were from Vietnam. So they spoke a little bit of French, but mostly Vietnamese. But that was at the time just a little bit too far for me. So I stuck with French, and being a language assistant gave me the opportunity to go and live in New Caledonia and then later on France, to get to know my family better and sort of try to connect with my roots a little bit. And it gave me sort of that first kind of look into a different culture and a different way of living, which I think has helped a lot today in the work that I've been doing in the Pacific, because I've kind of gained, that insight into how others live, how it's different to what I've grown up with, but it's, in terms of sort of the women's football and that kind of realm, we've all sort of faced similar barriers and challenges. So, different but the same is one thing that I would say I've really learned a lot over my career, and especially working in this region. But yeah, I think those early roles that I took on have definitely contributed a lot to what I'm doing in the future and what I've been doing these last few years as well.
Before jumping into digging a bit into your further career, I just wanted to highlight something, which is that one of the reasons behind Katya and I talking in English in this podcast, since we're not native English speakers, is that we want to share our stories from many parts of the world, trying to take them for those who are unable to speak this common language, which is supposed to be English for everyone in the world. And I am excited to hear what you're saying, because it's always important to bring these experiences to try and learn from other people's languages because of that, because otherwise they will never get to know their roots, their heritage, and all those other features that at times you have, but at the same time you are not fully connected because of the language barrier. And this is an amazing story. Thank you for sharing this with us. It sounds really special that you have all this multicultural background.
Yeah. I think, sometimes when you're younger, it's difficult because you stand out as being different. But as I've gotten older, I've kind of grown to understand that it's, these differences that make you unique and make you who you are in the world. So yeah, I embrace it a lot more now than what maybe I did when I was younger.
You hear that, embrace your difference. Everyone out there. No, but yeah, just coming back to this part. You then, after these experiences, you joined the OFC as a media and communication coordinator. How was it to start working in football? And did you plan this, or did you just achieve this out of a casual connection with football?
I definitely didn't plan it. I didn't know that it was an opportunity that existed in the world when I was younger, and it was kind of through a connection to someone who at university I knew, and who way back in the day I'd played against, though. So former football fan Priscilla Duncan, she previously held a role with OFC as the HOD of Media and Communications, and I saw that she'd posted that she was leaving to take on a role with FIFA. So I thought to myself, well, I didn't know that, working in football existed, and B, okay, if she's leaving, that means maybe there's a role there. So I got in touch and sent my CV and wrote a letter about, why I'd be interested in working there. And I was just really fortunate that they were looking for someone, and it just worked out that, I was what they were looking for. So yeah, that's kind of how that journey began, kind of luck and just a chance seeing something on Facebook and leaping at it, I guess.
Yeah, so with this first experience, you stayed at the same job position for 3 years. And after these 3 years, you started working as the head of Department of Media and Communications. What were the responsibilities which came along with the job positions?
So I guess initially, my first role was doing a lot of the roundups. So being in contact with people across the region and sharing their news. And then I guess taking on the HOD role, it came with a bit more responsibility, like managing other staff, coming up with the budget, ensuring that we stuck to it, doing a lot of the logistics and administrative stuff. So a little bit less of the, I guess, hands-on work, but it was a small team, so there's still a little bit of that, and more administrative. I mean, I guess I'd kind of call it slightly boring stuff, the stuff you need to do to make sure that everything runs, but it's a little bit less of the human contact that is kind of what gave me the joy, which is, meeting people, telling their stories.
This boring part, I think I can agree that we need to do it in order to accomplish the enjoyable one, right?
Yeah, exactly.
and after this experience, I mean, thanks to this, both the boring and the enjoyable part, you got to move from New Zealand to Tahiti, I think. I don't know in English, but Tahiti for me, to work as the Tahiti Football Federation as a media and communications officer. The job position, I mean, if you read it kind of like from a non-expert point of view, seems the same as the one that you have previously, but this is a completely other country. So completely different. How was it? Can you please tell us about the tone, getting to meet this culture, engaging with this football fandom? Could you please describe how is it in Tahiti and a bit about your daily basic tasks?
Yeah. So you're right. It was pretty similar work to what I'd already been doing. I guess the difference was that it was in a different language. So I really struggled with that because whilst I'd worked really hard to build my French language skills, I didn't have a formal education. So when it came to having to actually write things in French, it was really, really difficult for me. And I was really fortunate that I had some really good colleagues who helped me out a lot in that area. But I think for me, it was about, I'd worked at the Confederation level and I wanted to get an understanding of what it was like to work in a member association. Part of that reason was that when you're at the Confederation, you sometimes, I guess you can be a little bit removed from the day-to-day that a member association goes through. You visit them, but they're preparing for your visit. So it's sometimes when you're there, it's a bit different to what the day-to-day might be like, because if you're visiting, it might be because there's a competition, that a confederation competition that's being run, so it's not the same environment that you would have normally. So that was part of the reason I wanted to see what it was like to operate within a member association and how different that might be to the confederation. And it definitely was, like at confederation level, you run competitions, but they're not every day. So that's one of the biggest differences, is that in each country, when they're running their league, there's a lot of football happening all of the time. It's not just one event at any, given time. You've got to cover, the grassroots, the youth, the senior, the men's, the women's, and then the other sort of variation. So you've got the futsal and the beach soccer that you've got to take into account. So there's a whole lot happening all the time. So I kind of felt like it was a lot busier. Yeah. And then of course there's the cultural differences. So Tahiti is different from New Zealand, obviously, being a French colony as well. But even different from New Caledonia and my experience there. New Caledonia is a Melanesian country, whereas Tahiti's Polynesian. So there's a lot of differences between those Indigenous groups. And then in terms of football, it's different again. I guess in the fandom, you have people who are very loyal to their clubs, but football in Tahiti, it's popular, but I think the popularity has waned somewhat over the years. It used to be, a sport that could fill a stadium, and for whatever reason, that's no longer the case. But that said, there's an amazing event that they have been running annually, which they haven't been able to with COVID, but it's called the Festival des Îles, which is the Islands Festival, which brings, so Tahiti's the main island, but French Polynesia is a group of many islands. And so this festival has representatives from all of the islands that want to take part. It offers football, futsal, and beach soccer. And they all come together on Tahiti for a week of competition. So men, women, everyone, it's huge. It brings together, over 1,000 athletes. It's a huge logistical kind of organization required, accommodation, food, transport, all that kind of thing. And it's a celebration of the different cultures from the different islands, as well as the sport. And it was amazing to be part of that. Just a really great experience. So there was a lot of good experiences that I was able to enjoy during that year. It was, very memorable.
What you said now, I think Maria is already packing up her things, ready to jump on a plane and go. I will follow her. Right? No.
This is a good part about Two Goals podcast. First, we can get to travel and visit friends, and second, we learn about geography.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
Exactly. But it's actually what you said about the football fever, let's say in Tahiti, we hope that this will change, at least for the women's side, for the next or during the next 3 years, with a pinnacle in 2023. Let's see. But, after your experience in Tahiti, you returned to the OFC base, and as we say in Portuguese, but in this case in the English language, the good child always return to home. So this time we make up a lot of things with the language. So this time you return to work as a social responsibility media communications consultant, which is actually your job position now. What value do you add to your organization through this role? What are your main responsibilities there?
So just go back to your Portuguese saying the good child always returns home. I'm just going to add this because I'm currently the only one of my parents' children who live in New Zealand. My two sisters both live in Europe, so the good child does return home.
Good one.
So I think in this role, I've had a lot of experience through all my previous roles, and being able to bring that to social responsibility has been really important to me because it's an area that I have a lot of respect for and I think can have a huge impact. The idea that we can use football as a tool to improve lives, to improve communities, but also, for opportunities to young people, I think is possibly one of the best ways to enjoy football. Obviously, I love my elite football. I love watching, Premier League, Champions League, all these kind of things. But I also get a lot of joy and respect from the work that's happening with young kids. And especially, so one of the key things that I work on is the Just Play program, which is a sport for development program that's supported by a range of donors in the region. So it has backing from the New Zealand and Australian government, the UEFA Foundation for Children, UNICEF Pacific. And it's a program that makes sure that it ensures that football is something that is available to anyone. So the idea that no matter your age, your race, your culture, your ability, you can play and enjoy football in a safe environment. So that's kind of the premise of the program, and it's something that I believe quite strongly is the case. I'm thinking of some of the different stories we've done, or the different outcomes that have come through this kind of football for development area. And there's this great woman in Vanuatu named Daphne, and she has, I believe, cerebral palsy, but it hasn't stopped her. She's involved quite thoroughly in the program. She's now a coordinator, runs the sessions, and she more recently represented Vanuatu at the Paralympic Games. So all those opportunities sort of began because she was included in this program. She wasn't excluded because of what she could or couldn't do. And I just think that's so important to give those opportunities. So that's one of the main reasons why I'm really enjoying the work that I do at the moment. It's maybe not the elite football that I have been used to, but I kind of think it's something that's equally important and part of the development journey for everyone, really.
Jacqueline, I think what you're saying is really important, because we have found out that not only in football, but everywhere else, I don't know, like in any company or in any city or country, I think we are aware that we need to think about sustainability and retribution. And because we're not longer seeing ourselves as individuals or just the center of the world in a way, we are aware that the environment, everything surrounding us, is completely affected by the things we do. So it comes with no surprise that you speak so passionately about your new role. So of course you needed to create another thing aside your professional career, because this is one of the main reasons we invited you, because there is a media platform that we have followed, mainly Katia. Katia was the one introducing this to me. But we have had many people before us working, as we mentioned in the introduction, working to cover youngsters, girls, and women, especially in this podcast, because we are passionate about showing this to the world. And this is how there was this space born, which is called Pasifika Sisters, where you gather stories from across the Pacific based on a passion for the beautiful game. Can you please tell us how was this project born? And since there are several Pasifika Sisters, who are they? Why created this group? And if you can please introduce this to our audiences.
Sure. So the reason I created Pasifika Sisters is I saw a gap in terms of covering women's football in the Pacific region, the Oceania region. There's always a lot of coverage of what men are doing, and the women are just as deserving of that media coverage and that visibility as the men. If you think about New Zealand, for example, it's kind of a similar case to the US, where the women's team is more successful than the men's team if you look at results wise in major competitions, but maybe doesn't get the same coverage or benefit of sponsorship opportunities as the men do, because maybe the men's team's been around longer, or for whatever reason. It's not a problem that's specific to my region. Obviously, like I said, the US, it's a similar thing. So it's just it's grown out of having traveled, extensively in the region through my previous roles, and just seeing that there are women across the region who are doing amazing things, not just on the football field, but in the administrative side, and trying to develop the game and to offer the opportunities to young girls or women to participate or be involved in some way. So that was the major driving force behind it. And so if I think, about some of the people who I guess I'd consider the Pasifika Sisters, obviously our first guest was Sarai Barraman, who you'll know as the Chief of Women's Football. She's a Samoan New Zealander, so currently kind of the pinnacle role model for women across the region in football because of the amazing journey that she's had and where she's at currently. So it was important to have her on because, you know, what she's achieved is so amazing and shows that there's a pathway from our small villages to the global stage. And then so far I've done profiles of 3 people. There's many more in the pipeline. It's just finding the time to get them all out there. So we also have Margaret Aka. She's a coach from Papua New Guinea, just amazing. She's a former player, one of the first Papua New Guinea women to play in a Australian league back in her younger playing days. And she is, there's not really words to describe her. She's amazing. She's a great role model for the women of Papua New Guinea because it's a difficult country to be a woman. I don't want to comment too much on, you know, geopolitical kind of background of a nation, but it's not the easiest country to be a woman. But she perseveres. She is always available to help other women, which I think is really important. She doesn't want to kind of go off on her own journey, leaving everyone behind. So that's what I think is particularly poignant about her journey, is that she wants to ensure that while she's blazing a trail, she's also creating a pathway for others to follow her. And then our third woman that we've profiled is Julia King, she's a businesswoman, a mother, a club member. She was the chairwoman of the Vanuatu Women in Sports Committee. She's heavily involved in offering opportunities for young people in her village to play football, and just a generally great role model for the things that she's been doing in Vanuatu. So it was important to profile her. But I mean, these 3 are just examples. There's so many more women in this region who are doing amazing things and sort of challenging some of the barriers and ideals that have been put in place over the years around women in sport and women in football. So hopefully there will be time to profile them all, but you know, just trying to make a start. And another reason that, you know, sort of, well, initially it was all about just profiling these women. It's also sort of, I guess, evolved a little bit because I do some updates on the different news as well, because I feel like it's important to collate all of that information in one place so people get an understanding that there is women's football happening in a huge majority of the Pacific Islands, and sometimes it's hard to find that news. So it's kind of important for me to put it all in one place, like so people like Katya can find it when she goes looking for it.
And it's exactly that. That's why it's so important to have these media platforms, because we can reach the world with that. I actually have to thank you for that, because you know that I follow Pasifika Sisters, and I share always, because I think it's very, very important. It's about the role models that you portrayed here, and for sure you will write more about. But it's also about this news, and this is something that I'm always fighting against, because we always have the great stories portrayed on the media. We know that these are the stories that they sell, if they sell in women's football. We hope so, but we need to start with something, right? But we need the others. So we need to give visibility not only to the ones that are on the podium already. We need to give visibility to the others also, for them to be able to reach the podium too. So this is what you're doing. That's why I said thank you, because now I'm aware of football there. I think last time I talked with you were saying to me that a women's football league was starting at that time. So amazing news. And this is the things that we need to know. And if I can add something that you talked about, New Zealand, for example, it is one of the national teams that I think should be more talked about, because historically they are always in the competitions. You have a lot of players they should be more well known, players that are there that when we see them, maybe we think they are like 20 years old, but they are 25, but they are playing for about 10 years. I don't know, but the cases of Ali Riley, Rhea Percival, for example, I think is the most capped player, right? And even one that we know, Beck Smith, now she's retired, but she played for ages. So we need more visibility. I think now in 2023 we will see a change of this perspective in Australia and New Zealand, but we need this more regularly. And I know I ask a lot, but I have to ask something for more. But these stories, the ones of the women that you portrayed, and also about women's football, we know there are a lot of stories out there. So there is any particular story that you covered in Pasifika Sisters that you'd like to share with us, to highlight here?
I think one story that I think is really important at the moment is what's happening in Tahiti. So, like I said, Tahiti is the main island, and then you have the multiple other islands that make up French Polynesia. And the Women's Football Development Officer in Tahiti, Stephanie Spielman, who you may have heard of, she was part of the FIFA Coach Mentors program and worked with the head coach of the Belgian women's national team. He was her mentor. So what she's been working really hard on over the past couple of years is taking football development from Tahiti out to communities across the rest of French Polynesia. So Nukuhiva, which is in the Marquese Islands, they've started some really good programs there. Just last week or the week before, the Tahiti under-19 team was on Raiatea for a training camp, but also to run a festival with some of the young children there to kind of encourage them and give them some role models to look up to and introduce them to football as a sport that they can get involved in. So I know she's got plans to take women's football to every corner of French Polynesia, and she's done a fantastic job so far. And I think that's one story that I enjoy writing about, and I can't wait to see sort of the next chapter of where she goes next and how it's embraced in those communities, but also how many of those young people end up in national teams in the future, because one of the main things is you don't know what's available and sometimes until you see it. And I think that, there's a lot of talented young girls across, not just French Polynesia, but as this is the example, a lot of talented girls on these islands who have grown up playing football but didn't know there was opportunities for them to play with other girls or to play in a national team. And by taking the game everywhere, it's presenting that as an opportunity and as a potential pathway for them that maybe they didn't know about before. So I think that's one sort of story that I've really enjoyed covering and will, I think, continue to cover.
You can't wait to know what comes next, and we also we join you. We join you, and we want to see it on the Pasifika Sisters right there. So now talking about, of course, we're talking about women's football that you portray very well in the Pasifika Sisters too. And when we talk about Pacific, and even I can call here World Cup, because nowadays when we talk about Australia, New Zealand, every time 2023 it comes up. So when we talk about this, is about the Matildas and Ferns. It's always, but as we talked before, there's much more to add. That's much more to tell. Can you please tell us a bit about weekly football, if there are any organized women football leagues? You told me before, like last year, one was starting, and if you have some numbers of how many girls and women who are playing, if you have some numbers here, please can you share it, because we like to know and discover even more about it. Can you share a bit, please?
Yeah, sure. So numbers wise, it's a little bit difficult to give numbers because administratively women's football isn't always, well followed in terms of, keeping a track of all these things. But I would say, since we last talked, there's been a lot of growth. And I think in part that's inspired by the idea that there's this opportunity for what we'll call a second team to go to the World Cup. New Zealand has qualified as a co-host, and there's this new playoff tournament. So OFC or Oceania has a half spot. So there's that kind of chance that, the second team could make it to a World Cup, which has just inspired so much action across the region. It's amazing. It's, on the one hand, a little bit sad that it's taken this to inspire them, but on the other hand, great, we've got something for all these countries to work towards. Yeah, so Tonga is one country where a huge amount of activity has been happening. They're running leagues, but they also looking to the outer islands as well. So not just focusing on Tongatapu, but looking to other areas. They just ran a trial in Vava'u, which is one of the other islands there. So, and that was a trial for their senior women's team because they're thinking, forward thinking, which is important. Papua New Guinea, unfortunately, well, they just started their league, I think, when we spoke last year, and unfortunately because of COVID they couldn't complete the finals stage, but it was a really, really well run. They had a northern and a southern conference, and I think from memory they had 14 teams across those two locations, which is incredible. Some of the teams were traveling hours to get to the base where the matches were played every Saturday. So it just showed that there's a lot of passion for the game, that if you give the opportunities, these women will grasp them with both hands, because that's all they've been looking for so long. Particularly in Papua New Guinea, in 2016 they hosted the FIFA Under-20 Women's World Cup, and there was a legacy program associated with that, but unfortunately due to some kind of political stuff happening in terms of governance, some of that didn't come through. But it's just a real testament to, I guess, the resilience of these women, that some of the women who were part of that World Cup, despite not having a league, have stuck to football and are now, some of the best players in that current league. So really happy for them to have opportunities to play. Where else? Samoa has a great league. So they encompass 2 islands and they have leagues on both islands. And then I think they have kind of a playoff where they come together. Vanuatu, they have a national league, which finished at the beginning of the year. And now they're sort of running some regional competitions. So they had the semi-finals for the Port Vila Super Cup this weekend, and the final will be next weekend. And that's between Erica Golden Star and Galaxy FC. So not only, exciting football, but they have great club names. Obviously, New Zealand has a strong league. I think they're running their provincial competitions at the moment. They've sort of changed the way that they run the top level football. They've made some changes to their national league. So the knockout cup competition is due to happen soon. So that's any kind of club from across the country can enter that competition, just like your knockout cups in most countries. So it'll see some interesting matchups, I'm sure, over the coming months. Tahiti's leagues are just starting up again. They had some issues with COVID-19, which I'm sure listeners around the world are very used to hearing about now. So they had to put a halt to some of their competitions just for a short while. And so they're all starting up again, and hopefully we'll start to have fans and things soonish in the stadiums. So yeah. And New Caledonia, again, same sort of issue. A bit of COVID put a delay to the start of the competition by a couple of months. They've recently come out of a 4-week lockdown, so everyone's eager to get the competitions up and running fairly soon. I know the men's comps kicked off over the weekend, so I'm sure the women's competitions will not be far behind. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of football across the region. Numbers wise, yeah, like I said, I can't give you anything accurate, but there's definitely a lot of women taking up the opportunities to be involved in the leagues across Oceania.
Well, Jax, I think I can speak coming from both of us. I think you now have two more, one Portuguese and one Colombian, who are now aware of the holistic strategy that you're applying in Oceania. I think that's really important. At the end of the day, I think this is an evidence that we're not demanding for things, we're working for them, and that there is always like a plan behind seeking for success in our local leagues, which is really important. I think that's something that at times people aren't aware of. And thank you really much for sharing this. I think there is so much to learn from the things that you're doing in each of your countries in Oceania. Thank you very much. And unfortunately, we are coming to the end of the show for today from the podcast. But we started with a crucial moment in your life. Now we would like to end with another one, which is, can you please tell us how was that moment when you beat Colombia, when you gained the opportunity of hosting the next Women's World Cup? And also, if you can add, as an individual and also as an organization, what are the expectations after the tournament, which is some of the things that we are always concerned. It's not only about hosting the event, it's what comes after hosting it.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, Colombia, but we were very happy to win. We were very happy when that was announced.
You asked for it, Maria. You asked for it.
I think, looking at not just at the idea that, some of the world's best players are going to be coming to this part of the world for the first time. The Southern Hemisphere has never hosted a Women's World Cup, so that's huge for us. So yeah, not only bringing the best players in the world, but bringing the fandom as well. I was at the semi-finals and final of the Women's World Cup in France. I was really, really lucky to attend those games, and the following that teams like the US, England, France have is just amazing. And I think that will be unrecognizable to football fans down under, because they've either not experienced it or it's not something, you may or may not know this about our region, but rugby is a very popular sport. The All Blacks, New Zealand's All Blacks, have a huge following, and you can watch the television news segment. It will be 5 stories about rugby and 1 about some other sport. So I think the idea that exists for other sports will probably be quite surprising, and should, fans be able to travel at that point, which, fingers crossed will be the case, I think, yeah, it will be quite surprising and eye-opening for people in this region to see what women's football fans look like, what they act like, and how much they're willing to spend to follow their teams across the world, basically, because it's, New Zealand and Australia are not the easiest places to hop to for a short trip. It takes a lot of planning and investment to come and visit us. So, it's going to be huge to have all of these fans coming to our countries. And then in terms of kind of the legacy that I'd like to see, like I mentioned earlier, that maybe we didn't see the legacy that we'd hoped for from the World Under-20 Women's World Cup in Papua New Guinea. And I think this is an opportunity to do better for the region this time around. I think one of the main things that I would expect to see from this event is greater participation, because like I said, if you don't see that these things exist, then maybe it's not something you'll ever dream of, because it's maybe not something present in your mind as something that you can dream of. So I think by putting this event front and center for young girls across the region, they're going to look at it as something that maybe in 10 years, 15 years time, they could be on that stage themselves. There's nothing stopping them from doing that. So yeah, I think participation will definitely be probably one of the biggest legacies that I would expect to come from this event. And then of course showing some of the rugby fans in the region that, you know, football's good too. You know, we don't always have to watch the oval ball. The round ball is just as exciting and enjoyable.
Fantastic words, and I completely agree with you. I think Maria too, and exactly what you said, the legacy about the participation, and also the way that you have another sport that is the king of sports and other than football. I mean, if we look back to 2019, and we are always using the numbers of 2019, we will start using other numbers until 2023. We hope so, that we start investing on that, on more data women's football. But even though if we look back in 2019, there was a huge momentum that was created. It started in 2015, 2019, and we hope to see even more into 2023. But impacted a lot in Europe, if we can say it. We know that it was like that. And Europe is the center of football. Sorry, Maria. But South America, but it is where the main leagues are, the men's side. And it was a huge impact. You saw, and you can see now the growth of the game, the sustainable growth of the game. And for sure, in Australia and New Zealand, it will be even bigger, especially when you don't have football fever. It will start igniting now. We hope so. Let's wait for it. And to include a bit, so sorry, Maria, for Colombia to lose the World Cup. To include you a bit here, we hope that Shakira hosts the tournament to have to opens up the first game, to have a bit of Colombia. It's salsa. I don't know, cumbia over there. So Jax,
we will transfer the message to Shakira, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. Jax, we reached the end of the episode, so thank you so much for accepting our invitation and wake up so early to record with us. To the audience, for you to know, we are recording this on a Sunday for the Two Goals podcast and on a Monday for Jax. So this is the proof that when we're talking about football, and in this case women's football, there are no barriers of time, day or oceans. It's the time and the love for what we do that connects us. And it is your love for football that you spread to others. The biggest example of it is the Pasifika Sisters platform, where you give visibility to your Pasifika sisters inside and outside the pitch. And with the women's football growth we've been witnessing as we talked, and the World Cup 2023 being hosted by your confederation, we believe your blog will be a reference for the ones already planning to visit Australia and New Zealand in 2023, as like us. We hope so. So for sure, if they follow your work there, they will be more than aware of what women's football is all about in the Pacific area. And above all, they'll know your Pasifika sisters, and they'll know Jax, the one behind the wheel. So thank you, Jax, for your work and for being here with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a real honor. Thank you.
Likewise, and to all of you listening out there, thank you for sticking up with us, and make sure you follow us on Twitter and Instagram with the name Two Goals Podcast. Thank you and take care.